Okay, for people joining this live stream, we are looking at a long requested, long awaited set of features around interactive highlighting and interactive graphics on the desktop and in the cloud. We've had the capability to do all kinds of interactive things in both of those environments for millions of years, but this is an attempt to standardize certain kinds of effects on graphics that people seem to like. All right, so let's get started here. Well, that's for sure. That should never ever happen. I don't ever want to. I'm going to delete that cell because that's so obvious it shouldn't even be mentioned.
Yes, except that it got it out in the open, and so.
Well, then let's put it back there and highlight it, maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say bold it instead of delete it.
Well, I think I just pressed the delete button. So.
That's okay.
All right. Okay. So, crosshairs, point highlighting, object highlighting. So those are.
So these are what are available in cloud.
Okay. So. Okay.
So this is a freeform crosshair.
Okay.
And so this is something that would sort of make sense globally at the scene level. This is an instance of a crosshair that is tied to that curve.
Okay.
And here we have sort of showing that it's single curve.
This is actually this is on test. Is this deployed in production?
It is. Yeah. It's just I don't like putting stuff on public facing servers.
Okay, so wait a minute. So this is just pure list plot. It doesn't say crosshairs. So this is something that happens by default for a list plot?
In the build that I had when I uploaded this notebook, list plot had it turned on by default.
I'm confused. On the production server or only on the test server?
Just so the mechanism used is on production. The code that turns it on inside list plot is currently on a branch.
I just don't understand how you actually did this. But so people out there in the world can't see this right now. Is that correct?
If they got a hold of this notebook, they would see what you're seeing.
Okay. All right. So this is
they have no way of running this notebook.
Okay. All right. Okay. I understand.
And so that's what you were just looking at is an example of what I consider a slice.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Well, there's a bunch of interesting functionality here. So let's take a look. So is this, change the appearance of an object when you mouse over it. That's important. Okay, so I am not a fan. Look at this shit. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. How did that still happen? How did that still happen?
I'm not sure.
Okay, well, that's not good enough.
Well, yeah. I don't know.
John, can you say something about why that still happened?
Not without looking at the notebook.
Well, I can see right there, bar chart somehow had something.
Well, no, I mean,
dynamic.
Just to say, all the dynamics in the system got disabled.
Okay, why? Why? I mean, we've been through this many times that we have to avoid that. That if you're going to use dynamics, they have to be set up so that they do not trigger that trust warning. Am I making sense?
Making sense entirely.
I mean, it's clearly a bug, but I can't comment on this.
I know, but it's a bug that's been there for like 5 years or more.
No,
and I've reported it like 100 times.
No, it's not one bug. It's a number of bugs.
Oh.
Many of which have been fixed, and this one clearly is either new or it wasn't noticed before. I don't know which.
Seems like a very basic bug because I've seen it thousands of times. I've seen it basically
if
whenever.
You open this notebook in 12.3. I do not think you will see that warning come up.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I've seen it.
I think something has changed in 13 that is causing the dynamic warning to pop a lot more.
Do we really need to look at it in 12.3? I can.
No.
No, I'm just saying.
I keep saying, just send me the notebook and I'll deal with it. Next
Okay, all right,
topic.
okay. All right. Okay.
Andrea, can you forward John the notebook?
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. So what are we looking at here? So what should I be looking at next? This design or what?
I think we should discuss the design. What do we want to name things? How do we want to split it up?
I wish I'd seen this before.
Sorry. I think, Roger, you and I have looked at this.
Yeah, but I don't want
ago.
a bunch of new options. I think we want something that's a little bit more composite.
I mean, we have both approaches.
Okay.
So we have options, including, the design includes options, including extensions to plot theme. It includes wrappers.
Yeah. But let's say crosshairs. Let's say that you want a drop line and a drop plane. Is that going to be a new option then? And then you want highlight curve. Is that going to be a new option then? And then you want highlight nearest data points. Is that going to be a new option then? I don't think it scales.
I mean, I don't think.
I think what you want is a collection of effects.
I mean, I think you have a small number of options that are quite flexible.
Well,
so,
let's talk about the design space that Roger just mentioned.
Right.
So can you bucket what these things are?
That's what we need. That's what we need to do. That's why I said I wish I'd seen this, so we could start bucketing them, because these are example of prototypes, and we have more candidate things. But we need to do that overview before we can bucket.
And so we have, I have 3 reference pages that I've started. One is for crosshairs as an option. One is for highlighting as an option. One is for highlighting as a wrapper. And the highlighting ones allow multiple effects to be specified at the same time.
Okay, explain the following thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, first question is, why aren't we doing a bunch of these things by default?
Maybe we are. That's what we're discussing now.
Okay.
I
mean, I don't see any reason why when you put your mouse near, I mean, I'm not seeing any curve highlighting here. Is there curve highlighting?
There is.
Okay. I'm not sure what else one would do when one had one's mouse in the area of the graphic here. Unless the graphic has locators and things on it, but they have a definite, active region.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, that could also be, one could imagine highlighted.
Tooltips.
Yeah, exactly. There's things that come up, explanations that come up, or events that come up when you mouse over it.
Right.
Right.
I mean, that we already we've had for years, we've had tooltip. So.
No, I'm just saying more of them, like there are events, like this is the maximum, this is the minimum, this is when the stock market crashed, this is when, servers exploded.
Right. And at the moment, labeling type effects are farther out. I think they're very interesting. I think there's a lot of things that can be done there, but neither cloud nor desktop is ready for them yet.
Well, except for tooltip, which we've had forever.
Right.
And I mean, there's maybe a variant of tooltip, which is, there's a question of when a tooltip is switched on or not. Am I making sense?
Yep. I mean, it's quite common that you get, the information that's sort of tooltip-like as a click effect.
Well, okay, but I mean, I'm asking. Okay, what does that mean? I mean, once you have the tooltip, you click on it and you get more, or what?
No, I'm saying that you would get, say, point highlighting by default. And then you have the ability to say, click on the point, and it puts up what the actual values are or additional information.
Yes. I understand, although it's not clear what that happens if you have multiple points here.
Well, you can only click on one of them at a time.
Okay.
And I mean, the other thing that you have sometimes, which I don't always like the appearance of, is like, say, your crosshairs where the actual values are tracking along the axis and displaying 4.7 or whatever.
Yes.
Well,
there are many such styles, and I would hope that you have or will, inventory all of those. But okay, so the thing that hasn't been done here is a proper inventory of all the various effects that we're looking for. So what you're providing here is fairly specific options that, I don't know. I mean, what types of plots do these apply to? Like if I have a parametric plot, what would it do?
I mean, a parametric plot, crosshairs still makes sense. Point or curve highlighting still makes sense. I mean, these are very general effects.
Yeah.
I mean, there are going to be some special cases. So crosshairs on a polar plot should probably not be a normal Cartesian thing. It should be a radial and circle or something.
Yep.
That's not listed in this notebook, but that's an obvious thing.
Well, and how would this? Yes, right. I mean, those are otherwise our coordinate systems are rectilinear, are they not? They might be differently scaled, but they're rectilinear coordinate systems.
Right.
Apart from polar plot. Is that correct?
There's a handful of exceptions.
Okay.
Polar plots, the radial axis plot, the radar plots.
Fine. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's go through then. Okay. So the concept is there's a wrapper like tooltip.
Mm-hmm.
There's some kind of generic, but I don't understand how crosshairs, if I want a particular object to have crosshairs on it, how do I do that?
So the design I'm proposing is that we have some crosshairs option, because it, in the freeform case, it has to apply to the whole scene. It doesn't make sense to wrap it around something because it's not going to be tied to that. And so if you look at the include crosshairs a little bit at the top of your right. So true is the freeform whatever. Automatic is
I would make that be
crosshairs.
all.
Maybe.
Rather than true. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe. None and all was my first thought, and then I thought about it a little bit more and thought maybe true and false.
So you might be right. Go ahead.
But anyway, automatic is only fire the crosshairs when you're over something.
Mm-hmm.
False is don't show crosshairs. List of values is do it in one direction but not the other.
Right, and 3D is not yet even close.
3D is not yet, and crosshairs don't make sense in 3D.
Well, depending on what kind of device you have.
No. I mean crosshairs as a line coming from a point. Or at least it gets more complicated because it goes to a face, not an axis.
Yeah, I know. So it drops onto a plane.
Right.
What's wrong with that? Seems useful to me.
I mean, I suppose it can be useful. I mean, we've been working on illustrations with Tim for viz functions that are, where we've been trying to figure out what looks good, for 3D to drop down and label coordinates and whatnot.
Right.
And so, it may be that you need two sets of drop lines. You need a drop line to the face and then a drop line from that point over to the axis or something. But anyway, 3D, not yet.
Okay.
So that is the first option, which is, controlling Crosshairs behavior. And this totally could be on by default.
I think the crosshairs not very elegant right now. They're just a big black line. At least here. How did we decide?
I think they're a little bit dark. We can lighten them up.
Okay. But how would we specify things like being able to click and get coordinates? Or even how would we specify getting crosshairs where the coordinates are displayed right at the crosshair position, for example?
That would be something else. I mean, that would be some sort of labeling feature.
Well,
and I don't think it's part of the crosshair design.
A style of crosshairs. Right, because I mean, there's another style which is just the point. Well, I mean, look.
I mean, that's not a crosshair, right? I mean, that is when you have just the point. And I mean, you could do that sort of labeling just as easily without the crosshairs.
Yeah, I know. I understand. I understand.
And so, I mean, that would probably be an additional option or effect in highlighting. And I think it's a very interesting one, but it's not one that.
Well, so these things that you're showing here are things you have now implemented, include crosshairs and so on. Is that correct?
There is a branch with them on it, yes. And we can push that branch, forward, and roll it out to lots of things, I think. But anyway, so crosshairs is one slice, and it's sort of the easiest slice of this set of functionality. The next one is how to control sort of the mouse over effect type things. And I forget. I think we came up with the current names in a previous round of this, and we can certainly change them. I'm not tied strongly to any of them. And for the highlighting, as Roger points out, there's a rich space here, and so the design for the option and the payload of the wrapper are pretty much the same. Where you have some simple forms and then more, a richer environment for specifying things.
Okay.
And so at the simple one, you have named effects.
Okay, what happens if you want, hold on. So what happens if you have multiple curves and you want to specify, I mean, like plot style, there presumably is a way you can presumably, I mean, it's unclear why we don't call it like plot highlighting to go along with plot style.
Certainly could.
I mean, maybe it needs the same syntax as plot style. And what about for graph?
I think everything, I mean, conceptually, things that work here should work in graph also.
Okay, so then maybe that's a reason to not, because plot style is obviously not a thing for graph. There it's vertex style.
Well, I mean, for graph, you could very easily want the split of vertex highlighting versus edge highlighting.
Yes, you could.
Um,
So that would be
so
calling it plot highlighting, then vertex highlighting, edge highlighting wouldn't be crazy.
I like the plot namespace. That's what the plot prefix.
Right. I mean, particularly if it follows the same design as plot style.
Right. I mean, the other thing that it could follow is
grid line. Well, Crosshairs is like
something like
line.
filling, which allows indexed specifications.
Yeah, but filling has this feature that it needs to be able to do pairs.
True.
Which, so far as I know, this doesn't. I mean, unless, how about highlighting the filling?
It's an interesting idea. I mean, for the most part, I tend to think of the filling as being somehow not the content of the plot. That things are tied to the curves, not the filling. But it's quite possible that things might need to affect the filling as well.
If I give a tooltip, no, I see a tooltip is in a fixed place. So the difference between this stuff
and also,
yeah,
one of the most effective highlighting mechanisms is to de-highlight the rest. Nothing works as well as that. Rather than sort of screaming louder, the other ones go silent, more silent.
Okay. So how does that affect all of this?
There could be it's basically a theme for how highlighting is done.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. I mean, so we'll actually get to Roger's case, a little bit in a few minutes, I think. I don't have it built in as a named thing yet. But so we have named of sort of common types of highlighting effects. Put a ball on things that is going around. That slice that shows all the balls in a vertical column is a named effect. And as I was saying, the option value and the payload for the wrapper are essentially the same, possibly exactly the same. But if you scroll down a little bit more, there's a longer table, which is sort of a method of defining an effect through sort of an association spec. Mm-hmm. And so you can say, what are my elements? So picking a few of these things out of order, like one of them is persistent. Whether the highlighting should be. Why on earth
is this using smart quotes here? Sorry, that's a.
Probably because of how I typed it in or something.
All right. Okay. Anyway, go ahead. Okay. No matter.
Anyway.
Okay. So,
but so persistent would be essentially whether it's a mouse effect or a click effect, and if you click, then it maintains that state until you click it again.
Mm-hmm.
You have things like style. So when the effect is is happening, what color should it be?
What about Roger's inverse effect kind of thing?
So that would be covered by that inactive style at the top of that table.
Other event when other elements. That's a weird way to do it, because I mean, essentially what you want to do is change the opacity, presumably, of everything else. Is that right?
I would have to go through,
but that's one thing. We have also tried graphs. We have de-highlight style, but one is to go sort of monochrome for the rest.
I've never used it. Okay, fine. But I mean, the fact is that we cannot go round kind of telling everything what their inactive style will be, because we're going to miss things, and that's going to be a very inconvenient way to do it. That is a thing that is to be highlighted above the rest should be able to say what should happen to the rest, rather than every element of the rest having to say what will happen to it if it is unhighlighted. Does that make sense?
I mean, but that's essentially what this is. Oh, okay.
No, it's not. This is an object by object specification.
No. This is not an object by object specification. I mean, the implementation may be object by object, but the specification is not.
What do you mean? But this says style to use when other elements are highlighted. So if I am downgrading myself, what style do I use for myself? Not how do I reach out to other elements?
Sorry, the wording is. I think we're just hung up on the wording. I don't think we're hung up on the concept.
Okay, so that is a thing where it globally reaches out to every other element and changes its style.
Mm-hmm. Correct. So it's style to use for other elements when highlighted.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing that I was just thinking about that you made me think about is, sort of what happens if, I mean, so one version of this, of Roger's de-highlight mechanism, would allow you to, so like you have 100 curves. And, maybe they're all the same style, maybe they're, different or whatever. And you select one and it, remains blue and all the others turn gray. Or 80% transparent, whatever. And then potentially you could then select a second curve and have it also be active. And so you have sort of two primary curves.
How would you do that? One of them, so by clicking, you would select one.
Correct. And if you clicked another one, then it would also become selected.
Right.
And so then the question is, sort of if you've specified this on different curves with different inactive styles, which one wins? Which is, may end up just being effectively arbitrary or random or something, but.
Okay, so hold on. So let's zoom out for a minute, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to do, first point is, we're trying to figure out what we get into top-level language to be used in the cloud and the desktop. And are you telling me that everything that's on this page, were we to approve this language design, would actually work in fairly short order? Is that true or is that not true? Or are we designing something for far out?
We are designing farther than we've implemented.
How much further? But not further than the cloud is implemented, correct?
I mean, some of this is further than the cloud is implemented.
Okay.
I mean, so, I mean, you have seen what, the cloud notebook that you were looking at is pretty representative. So we have crosshairs, we have point highlighting, we have, element highlighting.
Yes.
Things that are like, pie chart being able to pop a sector out when you click on it is possible in desktop, but not cloud.
That's been something that's been there for years.
Yes. And
it's not my favorite feature because basically it locks things up when I have large, it has a habit of freezing graphics when they're large. Am I making sense? I don't know whether it automatically switches itself up for sufficiently large graphics.
I think it does. I think everything, in that chart family of things cuts off at like 25 or 50. I don't remember which.
Well, maybe it's just the incredible annoyance of those dynamic warning messages that come up for every histogram and have done for years, despite me complaining about it 100 times. And that needs to be tracked down and fixed. But okay,
so anyway, there's a small core, smaller core of the most common things that could roll out widely relatively quickly. And then there's some things like the de-highlight, which are, we wanted to make sure that the design had, would be able to encompass them, even though we aren't, at a point where we can roll it out yet.
Okay. By the way, it should surely be saying plot theme arrow full highlighting, shouldn't it?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, so look, plot highlighting seems like a reasonable thing with a default that presumably will be automatic, so long as that isn't going to, be a performance issue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, I just see no reason why we shouldn't have that. Now, in terms of crosshairs, that reminds me of grid lines.
And I think that by default, crosshairs should follow the same style as grid lines.
Really?
At least very close to.
And should they be there by default? I'm not sure. We've had them by default in Wolfram Alpha forever and ever.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure anybody ever noticed, but
I mean, a lot of times we have features that people
like
only
them, but they
notice them
never
when
say
they
them.
aren't there.
Well, yeah, quite. Okay. Well, so what would be the include? What other options are include XXX? And I mean, plot highlighting would be for, in its simple default way, would be for either everything or for a list of the plot elements in the same way that plot style deals with plot elements.
Right.
But there are more complicated things like filling highlighting, which could potentially be handled by a more elaborate association-based syntax. And
Mm-hmm.
each individual plot highlighting could have, instead of just red, could have potentially an association that describes down, like the one that you have down there for the highlighting wrapper. So highlighting as a wrapper would go along with, and how does that relate to highlighted graph? Or is it highlight graph? Gosh, I use it all the time and I don't remember because it auto-completes.
I think it's highlight.
Yeah, I think you're right. But so isn't there a graph highlighting option?
Yes.
I think highlight graph is...
Well, highlight graph
is different.
Well, I know what it is. I use it all the
Yes.
time. I mean, it allows you to specify like a subgraph or points within a graph and highlight those specific points within a graph.
Right.
Okay, so the question here would be, should there be, is that, for example, is that useful functionality for graphics or plots to be able to reach in from the outside?
So there's
and
graph
say-
highlight style.
Okay. All right, but then that's a bank switched highlight style for the graph. But the important concept is highlight graph reaches in from the outside of the graph and highlights specified elements.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have an analogous thing for a graphics object.
I don't think so.
No, I mean, but whether we want one or not is a
So
different
there's
issue.
graph highlight and there's graph highlight style.
No, I understand, but graph highlight is the function that
No.
reaches in.
No, graph highlight is the option.
Well, what's
Highlight graph is the function.
Okay, fine. Okay. So what does graph highlight take as an option? I mean, take as a value?
It's a mix of vertices and edges.
Okay, so that's not the same as what you're proposing here.
The
Because
elements
plot highlight.
those are the two elements that exist in a graph.
No, I understand that. Graph highlight. Did I misspell this?
No, it's fifth down.
You missed an
Oh,
H.
yeah, you missed an H.
H-I-G-H.
And what's this?
That is just something which draws it draws a
No, I
frame
know,
box.
but the
Yeah.
question is whether, how does that relate to highlighted, highlighting? How does that relate to what's in the graphics?
Right, and you may notice that I have a note of, maybe we co-opt, this symbol.
I think that would be quite sensible.
I
mean, it
to
would
the
be
extent that
two
it only
different
takes
meanings.
one argument right now.
Why is it two different meanings? Let's see. This is a bunch of options there. I haven't used this as much as I should. I've had a bunch of applications where I should have used this. I had sort of forgotten that it existed.
I think you said that the last time this came up a couple of weeks ago.
I was going to ask that, but from the meeting notes when we had this several times ago, I'm pretty sure we talked specifically about this again. But yeah, don't remember.
Okay, so that's an issue which we need to. Okay, so highlight graph. Graph highlight. So that's a list of elements.
Yes.
Which is very different from plot highlight.
Plot highlighting, I think.
Yeah, well, I understand, but so.
Yeah.
So plot highlighting, the concept would be that the elements are specified positionally in a list, and what is being delivered is the highlighting theme or style. We've got quite a constellation of related things here. And Roger, you were discussing yet other kinds of factoring, kinds of effects and so on.
Yeah, but that's why I wanted to have worked through this before.
Well, I know, we should have done that. Yeah.
But and so yeah, it's a big space, and when we've exhausted it, we kind of know because things start to look like noise at the end.
Yeah.
And I thought that this reminds me of a prototype we built 10 years ago, because that's when we started in on the cloud. To have these interactive effects in the cloud. And I don't think we've revisited it.
That was more the export directly to some framework stuff.
Yeah, exactly. To be picked up there.
Yep.
And we had a problem because we introduced a lot of interactive stuff, and we had many more on prototype. Like you click this bar and it would do a backflip, literally. Lots of things that we kind of ended up not going. We tamed it down, but it was still very controversial in the desktop to have interactivity.
Well, I think we're over that hump. I mean, you're talking about the backflip as in you click a bar, it turns itself around and shows you what a labeling behind it or something.
Yeah, we had all kinds of, I mean, that's not super important, but the fact that it was such a negative reaction from you in particular to the interactive graphics that we sort of toned it down for some time to come.
Well, right. And maybe the world has moved on. I mean, I think that the thing that I don't really like very much is the kind of, shiny, I mean, the kinds of things that people have thought in the past would make, good marketing presentations where, the bar chart has a shiny bar that glints in the sun or something.
Sure.
Right? I mean, I think that there was a period of time when people were just thrilled about those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
I kind of feel that time has passed. Now the question is, of the things that are actually functionally useful, because I reacted very negatively to those things, and I'm glad we didn't implement a bunch of those things. So now the question is, of things that are functionally useful. I mean, one of the things that keeps holding me back is performance, because it's not useful if we put in some fancy feature and then all plots grind to a halt, or it only works. Because I think one of the things that is really different in a lot of what we do is there's a lot of programmatically generated diagrams, which can have, many, many curves. They can have, it's not just a hand done, oh, I'll select this column in some spreadsheet and, plot one curve there. Right? We routinely will have something where it is a programmatically generated collection of curves and so on. And so we have different issues from something where it's just like every curve is hand specified. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
So we have to be kind of careful that the things that, the whizziness and the kinds of features which are relevant for, I've got two curves artisanally created, so to speak, different story here. So, and I have no idea, like, I mean, if I were to generate a hugely complicated plot with 1,000 curves on it, and then I were to ask for crosshairs, what would happen? Would it grind to a halt? Would it still work? What would it do?
If it's the free-floating crosshairs, it shouldn't grind to a halt at all.
Right, it doesn't care. But let's imagine that it's the automatic behavior.
Automatic behavior in cloud, I think, wouldn't care. I'm not sure about desktop.
Well, I mean, it's a hit testing thing. Right. And the question is, do we have that efficiently done or not? And is it even plausible to do it efficiently? Because if we're hit testing something, I mean, it depends on what happens when we have, if the whole thing is a giant ball of wool.
Right. Can you go back to the other notebook for a moment?
Yeah. This one here?
No, the one in desktop. So go up to where we had the Wolfram language examples.
This one here?
Yep. And scroll down. So like that parallel axis plot, that's 50 curves. That remains very responsive. Up 500 will be fine.
That's nice.
If you go to 5,000, it's going to start to lag.
Well, 5,000 will be just like nothing. I mean, there's nothing to see.
Yeah. Well, yep.
I mean, it's going to be blue, the whole thing.
It's going to take a minute just laying everything out.
Why is it taking so long to lay it out?
I'm not sure why. It's taking longer than I think it should.
So also one of the issues here is the fact that you're doing this, or that you're implementing this as a mouse over means that, correct me if I'm wrong, Brett, but I believe that you're not and cannot take advantage of multi-line objects.
Correct. It is not a multi-line object.
Although
every line is only there once.
Which means that at the very beginning you have an inefficiency. Even before you've done mouse overs, you have an inefficiency because instead of having one line box that contains lots of lines in it, you have one line box per line.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, but so what should happen in a case like this? Did you switch off at some magic number? Did you switch off?
I think that one did switch off at probably 1,000 or 2,000.
Okay, at which point, by the way, it should use the combined line box, right? By the time it's switched off highlighting, it should be using the combined line box. Is it?
Probably not.
Yeah, well, so that's
probably an optimization that hasn't been made yet.
Right, so it's just a bug.
Right. And John and I have discussed ways of doing this so that it doesn't need to use 5,000 line boxes.
Oh, I have to say that discussion, I believe you, but that discussion isn't within my memory.
We have the discussion and then it immediately goes out of your memory again.
Okay, that's
We
entirely
have it every,
possible.
every version.
Okay, so here, this was implemented years and years ago, right?
Yes.
This is a quite lovely and very interactive thing. So one question would be, if a user wants to interact, and what is that? 3/2 times 10 to the 8.
I was noticing that just recently, and I'm really curious to know.
Right, but so if a user wants to implement this essential functionality, how could they do it?
Not easily.
No, that
So
wouldn't
this
be
is
easy.
what.
Yeah.
So this is what we have to think about: is what components do we need to provide so that this is easy to implement? Because this is pretty nice.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I mean, one could imagine in a list plot scenario that this thing about having discrete elements of, with finite width in the list plot was a thing that was desirable. I mean, some list plots are a representation of a continuous function at discrete points, and others are discrete points like this one.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, the correspondence between different plots in a empaneled layout, so to speak, seems also relevant.
Yes, exactly. So like the crosshairs would be, we would need to make sure that they work well in multi-panel layouts.
Right. I mean, this is a pretty nice,
really
graphically, I don't know how, when we did this 10 years ago or more, this particular.
Version 8, I think.
Yeah, version 8.
Which is when?
09, 010.
Yep.
Yeah.
Prior to me being in the
so
company.
a dozen years ago. Okay.
Yep.
So this has been around a long time. So we've had some form of interactive graphics for this specific case for a really, really long time.
Right. And that's just a complicated dynamic module. Let's put it this way. That output was not already in the notebook because I knew it would pop the dialogue.
I'm not happy about that dialogue. I'm really not happy about it. I mean, we need to solve.
Can we
that.
delete it? Let's get rid of it.
That's what I've been pushing for certain cases where we should be able to tell more carefully whether this is our internal code or external code. If it's our internal code, we shouldn't have that dialogue.
We can sign them. I mean,
I know that's what I've been saying for years.
Okay.
Okay. So in any case, so this is an example of this is a great example. And gosh, I mean, like this effect of having that bar representing a value there. That wasn't even included in your list of effects up above, was it? Or down below?
It's a variation on the slice.
Yes, but it's not explicitly included. So the question, I mean, I think, as Roger was saying at the beginning of this meeting, there's more exploration of this design space.
I don't quite understand why you say it's not explicitly. It seems like I mean, except for the fact that it's two-paneled, it seems like a trivial variation on slice.
Well, except that it's thick.
Yeah, but that's
you
just
can
a style.
it. Yeah,
It's just a style.
Yep.
Is it? Well, I mean, there has to be a named style to have a slice that is as thick. I mean, like, for example, if these were varying width, if each data point.
I mean, if you can ascribe it a color, why not a thickness?
I understand that, but
trivial.
should it be a fixed thickness, or if these things? I mean, right now, I think these are, daily plots, but maybe there's a gap for weekends or something.
Okay, well, if this is, I couldn't tell if this is discrete. Then yes, there's
finance doesn't have gaps on weekends. Weekends don't even exist. That's as simple as that.
Okay, so the discreteness is interesting and different, but the thickness is not.
No, I agree. I understand the thickness could be there, but I'm saying the discreteness, which is data dependent thing. I mean, the idea, which is similar to highlight a single bar in a histogram or bar chart, for instance, this is highlighting, something for a discrete. I mean, again, it has to be described what this is. I mean, don't we have? I mean, this particular type of chart. I don't know what this is. The high-low close chart.
It's a candlestick chart.
Okay, but I mean, we have the notion of a candlestick chart disembodied from anything to do with finance as well, right?
I think all the examples are pretty much still finance, but yes.
Right. I mean, in principle, we could have this for, I don't know what, tides or electricity, something or others, or all kinds
it really
of
wants 4 values, so it's a smaller set of.
We have other similar things. Box whisker.
Yeah, box whisker is a similar idea.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an interactive one where you can add.
I don't know why. Sorry, I don't know why we're not having this for example, plotting weather data. Well, it could be exactly the same thing: the beginning of the interval, the high, low, and the close.
I mean, you could. I mean,
would it
somehow
actually work,
people don't traditionally do that, but
well, I know.
I'm not sure why.
And I'm not sure why this doesn't take a time series. Does it take a time series?
It does.
Why does it say that? It doesn't say that here. It needs to say that.
Okay, we'll add that to the notes.
So for example, if I were to taking here, if I say air temperature data for, I don't know what, New York City or something, and then let's say, why is this acting so sluggish? Now minus 1 month to now. Then I should get a time series out from that. And I should be able to just say, I'd not really thought about doing this before.
That seems unlikely to work.
Why?
Because you'd need to say that you want the
daily
per day, that you want, what it was at midnight at the beginning of the day, what the high was, what the low was, what it was at the end of the day.
Which it can't compute from the time series.
Correct.
Although it certainly could if you told it, just like you can say in date list plot, I want a day granularity list plot, right?
Yes. I mean, that part's not a problem.
No, but I mean, if we could give a granularity to the candlestick chart, then it could do the same thing. Could it not?
What's in that data? Does it have 4 values?
No,
it does not. It has 1 value, but if you aggregated it, well, okay, so I suppose the missing function is given a time series every 15 minutes or every 5 minutes or whatever it is during the day, right? Aggregate that into a daily open, high, low, close.
Yeah.
Right. Percent 17.
Indeed. Anyway, it does seem like we should be able to leverage those functions for more.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those functions have been rather, so I mean, those functions have been rather isolated and not connected. I mean, that's nice functionality there. But those same basic ideas we should be able to use for other interactive plotting.
Right. And right, I had mentally classed that as slice, but without addressing the thickness issue.
Right. Look, it seems to me, and we should probably wrap up here, but it seems to me that the main takeaway is more exploration of this design space, and let's come back in a week or two and let's look at this again when there's a bit more exploration of the design space, and we decide, we're not going to, gulp down the whole thing immediately, but at least once we know what that design space looks like, we can decide what corner of it we're actually introducing for the upcoming version. That seem fair?
Sounds good.
I mean, and I think, we've talked through a few of the issues here, And I'm a little concerned about the 7 different forms of highlighting and so on, and highlighting, by, well, I mean, look, with styling, we have a perfectly successful thing happening with plots where you can either do it from an option level plot style arrow, red, green, blue, or you can do it as a wrapper. I think that is a successful thing to do. Does everybody agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the idea of doing that same kind of thing here for highlighting is a good idea. I also think that factoring the styling from highlighting is a good idea. And we don't want to try and have some interwoven, style and highlighting thing.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, I mean, so we could imagine something where you could have as a style designator red, but it isn't actually red. It's something that says, highlighting only of red. See what I'm saying? Contingent styling.
Right.
Right,
Which I think is along the lines of what John keeps pushing out of his mind, which is that there would be
Which John?
Foltz, sorry.
Okay.
That I forgot there were 2 in this meeting. That we could have a graphics directive that sort of was what is the style to apply on when you mouse over a thing.
I see what you're saying. So that is, I mean, it would be like, because that has all kinds of issues, because there are many different forms of mousing, right clicking and, touch interfaces and, who knows what, some VR, AR thing and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what are we trying to say here? You're saying there could be almost like an event handler for different types of actions. These are different restylings of this element. Is that right?
I wasn't going that far.
But I mean, that would be
I was just saying, suppose let's call it focus style as a wrapper.
Well, or hover style or click style. I mean, there are many different kinds of actions that you can take on an element.
Yes, there are.
I mean, this is what a typical kind of event-based system would say, on click, do this.
Right. And then you go to an iPad and it's really weird.
Mm-hmm.
And which is why I said focus, because
I think
that was an attempt to abstract between a mouse-based thing and
right.
a touch thing, and
but we're basically still saying there is a restyling that happens, which, by the way, in this idea of you are there and everybody else is quieted, is that's already a that then who gets to win if there are 2 different things that are trying to quiet down the other elements, and they're both somehow in focus. See what I'm saying? Who gets to win the global war?
Right. And I mean, it depends on what your mechanism is. If it's a mouse over type effect, then presumably one does win. Based on who hit tests first or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
If it's a click thing and it's a little bit more persistent, then I can pick out the curves for the UK and for the US and compare them out of everything else in the world.
Right. No, that's a nice thing to be able to do. Right. And I mean, there's also the possibility of a selector that is, a legend-based selector. You click the legend and that highlights the curve.
Yep, those are common also.
Right. So as Roger has said, design space needs to be explored. And I think
there's an even more exciting thing, because we're looking at high dimensional visualizations. We're going to look at low dimensional projections. And you got to be able to you click in one panel and mark something up as one panel. You got to see them light up in the other panels.
Well, quite. Yes.
You know, and so,
Yep.
but there's a lot of ways, you know, a lot of these things you pointed out, efficiency things is a key thing, scalability. And so some of it can't be done all the, you know, right away because it's
right.
just not going to be
That's fine.
efficient. But
Okay,
And,
I
and
want
that
to
gets into
explore
the
the
brushing
design
that is
space.
listed at the end of this notebook of, you know, sort of selecting things and having it, you know, affect other things
Right.
more remotely.
We need to wrap up here, but
Yep.
and actually there's another live stream coming right up about tree outlines,
Cool.
which might be kind of related, but who knows? Okay, so I mean, we're just warming up on this topic, so let's try to meet about it before too long and come back with slightly more. I mean, I think we're
Right.
realizing that, you know, there are a variety of ways that you could poke at an object, and we got, you know, specifying how you could poke and what to do when you poke seem to be like the obvious issues.
Yep.
That is, you know, you could poke with a legend, you could poke from, you know, you could, well, it's hardly a poke, but you could specify it at the level of the outer plot, etc.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing for the design is to leave it, you know, flexible enough that, you know, as we come, you know, if there's a whole new paradigm of, you know, some sort of thing that becomes popular in 10 years or something, that it's just another lever that gets added to.
Yeah, right.
Right.
I mean, I suspect that the most obvious coming attractions will be various kinds of multi-selection, natural forms of multi-selection that never really took off on the iPad. I mean, we had in the, you know, some touch press products, we had, you know, things where you could, you know, have 10 fingers on the iPad, or at least 5 fingers on the iPad as multiple, you know, manipulate this molecule with 5 touch points. But I don't think that kind of idea, just like shaking, I've not seen this interface, but I mean, it was the case when I think it was iPhones first came out, that there was the shake action that could cause things to happen.
To undo.
Yeah, it wasn't
Does
in
it
the
still
initial
work?
iPhones, but
Yes,
yeah,
it still does
undo.
work.
Really? Does it work still?
And at least one of the apps that I use regularly, yes.
Wow.
It does. I'm always doing it by accident.
Huh. Wow. Okay. That's a high discoverability feature. Okay. Anyway, we should wrap up here. Thanks, guys.